Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel. Kung Fulosophy Episode 3, Part 3, which will also be the final part, on is internal style good for health? Now let's just quickly recap. On Part 1, I talked about how longevity is not actually a good measurement to see how healthy any exercise is, including internal styles, because the contributor to one's lifespan is just too complex. There's so many factors that goes into determining how long a person could live for, and exercise, quite frankly, holds a very minor portion out of everything that contributes towards longevity. So even though in the Chinese culture it has been for centuries where they value an exercise or martial art style's health benefits based on how long its practitioners live, it's actually a very incorrect way of thinking and not very scientific at all. And in Part 2, we talk about how our own subjective experience in doing any exercise, including internal style, is not a good indicator on whether or not the exercise is really beneficial for your health. Now, in the episode, there might have been some confusion in the sense that I'm not saying that Tai Chi isn't good for health. What I'm saying is, what you experience, if I train Tai Chi and I'm like, okay, I do Tai Chi for 30 minutes, an hour, and I feel really, really good, that kind of feeling, while it is good to have it, it is not enough as an evidence to suggest that whatever you do is actually good for your health, okay? Because your own experience is very subjective. We've talked about in the last video how our five senses are mostly confirmation bias or perception bias. So basically, we accept something first, and then we try to seek for evidence that support what we believe in. So in the same sense, if you go into Tai Chi already made up your mind that thinking Tai Chi is really good for your health, then you will feel good afterwards. And vice versa, for someone who is completely skeptical about Tai Chi, then he will do it and he will not feel the health benefit at all. So that kind of first person feeling is not really a good indicator, but that does not mean Tai Chi is not good for your health, okay? So what this really means is that you can't judge Tai Chi or any other exercise health benefit purely based on your own personal experience. And furthermore, there are no empirical evidence that Tai Chi is superior in its health benefits than other exercises found around the world, whether it's yoga, Pilates, other martial arts styles. So that's another misconception that people often get, that they think Tai Chi is superior in terms of health benefit to everything else. That is incorrect. There's no evidence to support that. But again, if Tai Chi is what you enjoy doing for health, then by all means do it, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't. I also practice Tai Chi, although not for health purpose. But in my system, there were maybe 3 of us that does it for combat purpose, and everyone else does it for health purpose. So it is a widely practiced benefit. And there's nothing wrong with practicing Tai Chi for health benefit. All I'm saying is, you should pick a health exercise because you like it or you enjoy certain aspect or element of it, not because it is better for your health than every other exercise on the market. That's just something that we can't actually determine right now. With that said, one of the viewers did point out that in the comments that there are a lot of researchers down on the benefit of health for Tai Chi. However, when I asked my friend who are actually medical professionals, one particular is actually studying traditional Chinese medicine at I believe the Cape Townian University. It's one of the only university in South Africa that offers traditional Chinese medicine courses. So when I asked him and also asked some other friend who is a practicing medical doctor, they basically say that these research papers are not exactly trustworthy. So basically, Tai Chi is good for your health, that's the short of it, but just exactly how good it is very hard to actually pinpoint or measure precisely. Another problem with this kind of research paper is what kind of Tai Chi are they actually researching, right? Because something that you might already realize if you hang around long enough in the Chinese martial art world is that if you find 100 person who does Tai Chi, they'll do Tai Chi 100 different ways. It's not really a good standardized example of how Tai Chi should be practiced. And of course, I know the Chinese government has been trying to standardize Tai Chi for decades, but obviously what they eventually created is what we call Tai Chi aerobic, right? It doesn't have any of the internal aspect or the deeper meaning of the movement structure, and mechanical understanding of the body. It just becomes a very shallow form of aerobic that looks like Tai Chi in terms of sequencing. So that is why it kind of gives you an idea of why standardizing Tai Chi is very, very hard. But the problem is that if you don't standardize Tai Chi, then what exactly is Tai Chi that you are trying to research, right? I mean, if one research group, they say, we're going to do something on Tai Chi, and then they find a practitioner that doesn't actually do authentic Tai Chi, then obviously their data would not represent the real Tai Chi. So based on this kind of logic, it's very hard to actually do any trustworthy research on the actual benefit of authentic Tai Chi, because, quite frankly, everyone disagrees upon what exactly is authentic Tai Chi. So in part 3 of this episode, we are going to look at some of the more unique benefits of Tai Chi. And I use the word unique loosely because they're not exactly only found in Tai Chi, but they are less likely to be found in regular exercises that you find, people commonly tend to do. And obviously what I'm going to be talking about only represents my own perspective, or rather my lineage's perspective, and if you're doing a different lineage of Tai Chi, you might not agree upon this, right? So unfortunately there's nothing I can do about it. So the problem with talking about anything specific about Tai Chi is that nobody will tend to agree on the same understanding. But unfortunately, in order to talk about something specific, I have to refer to my own lineage of Tai Chi. And also bear in mind that I'm not a health professional, I've never studied it, so the way I understand it might not be correct, right? So take everything in this video with a grain of salt. I mean, I did talk to my friends who are health professionals about these ideas, and so basically I ran these ideas with them and got some feedback. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today, but just know that, I'm not really qualified, so take whatever you think makes sense and just ignore the stuff that you don't think makes sense or you don't agree upon. So in my lineage, my master believes that Tai Chi is not determined by what family or what lineage or what style or how many steps. There's no 24 step, 48 step, 108 step. It's not important, right? I talk about this in my other videos on my lineage, right? Grandmaster Shiming and all that. So what we believe in is that Tai Chi is governed by the 10 principles. So whatever you do, if it's according to the 10 principles of Tai Chi, then it is Tai Chi. It doesn't matter how many moves you do, what sequence you do, it really doesn't matter. It's just, if we take one single movement, one single pose, if that pose fit the description of the 10 principles of Tai Chi, then you are doing Tai Chi. Right? Another thing that we qualify ourselves and others with is basically separation of yin and yang. So I'm going to basically talk about Tai Chi's potential health benefits based on the 10 principles. And of course, I am not going to talk about my own personal feeling, like, I do Tai Chi, I feel great, because that is not empirical enough to be used as evidence. However, I'm going to point out the actual physical mechanics and how that most likely will contribute to certain health benefit on certain part of the body. So firstly, let's look at the head, right? In Tai Chi, we have this requirement called 虚灵顶, which you can roughly translate it to, 虚 means to be hollow, so it's like a hollow pointing up force, or like a hollow pulling your head up kind of force. Right, those of you who've been doing Tai Chi, you should know that in Tai Chi you always have your intention reaching up at something above your head, so your head should never fall downwards. So how is this good for your health, right? Basically you can think about it like this. Our head is actually quite heavy. It's one of the most heavy objects. Well, the head is one of the heaviest part of our body. It weighs more than our arms, our legs, and all of that. And our neck is actually quite not that strong in comparison to other parts of our body. And if you imagine you holding a stick, it's much easier to hold the stick upright than if you tote the stick, right? So if you hold a stick or a sword or anything like this, it's much easier to hold it upright than to holding it slanted. And obviously, the result is even more severe if you have something heavy dangling on the end, like a mace or a hammer, right? But the physics here is quite clear. It's easy to hold like this, more difficult to hold like that. So how that translates is that our head is heavy, our neck is not as strong. So any angle that you tote forward is going to put more strain on the neck, whether it's the skeleton, the joints, or the muscles. They're all going to get strained the more you tote forward. So if you, in everyday lifestyle, you always have your head like this, then chances are you're going to have neck problems. And I can say this with certainty because I personally is a victim of this kind of bad habit, right? Ever since I was younger, because of studying, also I used to draw a lot, and then later on with computer, working in front of a computer, doing whether it's design work or other stuff, you know, you kind of go for long hours, you get tired, and then you start slanting forward, and eventually, you know, I had a lot of neck problems even till today. Those problems never fully gone away. And when I went to the Chinese bone doctor, that's basically how they explained it. They say that because I'm starting forward, it's adding strength to my neck constantly. So, in reverse, if you can form a habit of always keeping your neck upright, like your chin in, head pulling upright, then that minimizes the kind of stress you have on your neck. And if you can form that kind of habit in everyday life, then you are less likely to have a neck problem. Now, obviously, this isn't unique to Tai Chi, right? You know, there are people who don't do Tai Chi, and the neck is upright, they have great posture. So this isn't something that you only can achieve through Tai Chi. However, Tai Chi is one of the few exercises, or shall I say internal martial arts, are the few exercises that actually stresses this kind of quality, right? If you go to a Tai Chi class with a legitimate master, he will constantly remind you every time your head holds forward that you should hold it upright. So that in doing this kind of training, it's more likely that you eventually get rid of your old habit and form the new correct habit. Whereas if you say now jogging, right? I'm not saying jogging is bad or anything, don't get me wrong. But you know, I've seen people jogging on the streets quite a lot. And you know, some of them have great posture when they jog and some don't. Because you know, they don't actually focus on fixing up their posture. They basically just jog to get some cardio exercise. So whoever's got the bad habit initially, it doesn't get better. They just keep jogging like this, and the problem that they have on the neck, for example, is just gonna get worse and worse. And so in that sense, this kind of quality is kind of unique to Tai Chi, because if you go to Tai Chi class, you get corrected. But you know, this kind of posture is not unique to Tai Chi. You know, people with good posture in general, the head will be upright and the neck wouldn't be slanted forward. Okay, next let's look at holding chest and bulging back. Now this is actually quite a misunderstood concept. And of course, this kind of quality does not come from house understanding, right? Initially, the entire Tai Chi system was designed for combat purpose. So holding the chest, bulging the back wasn't initially designed for health purpose. However, it does coincidentally have health benefit. That's why eventually Tai Chi became sort of a health exercise more than a martial art. But I will tell my students and other people is that the health side of Tai Chi is very hard to measure. So if you want to actually get the health benefit, which is actually a coincidental byproduct, you have to measure your training through a combat measurement, right? You have to go from a combat perspective and measure whether you're doing the move correctly. And if you are, then that byproduct of health benefit would come naturally. Whereas if you don't do it according to the combat requirements, then you're not actually sure if you're doing it correctly, or you're doing it similar to what people used to do back in the days, and therefore you might not be gaining the health benefit that initially was supposed to be found in Tai Chi. Now, of course, the issue here is that if you just move, right, no matter what move you do, as long as you're doing a move, your body is getting exercise and you will feel healthier than if you were not moving at all. And this is why it's so hard to regulate on what exactly is correct Tai Chi, because someone who's doing it incorrectly in the park or wherever else, they will still feel like they're getting health benefit, and they are because they are moving. So compared to someone who's not moving at all, sitting on the couch, eating potato chips, then yes, they are getting healthier. But it becomes very hard to determine how much healthier you should get, if you compare incorrect Tai Chi to correct Tai Chi, and that's why this entire market is very convoluted. Now I'm talking about Tai Chi because that's what I do, but of course the same principle or concept can be extended to other internal martial arts as well. Okay, so let's go back to holding chest and bulging back. So initially, holding chest and bulging back is because you want to have the best structure to receive force. I've talked about this in other videos, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But now, why is that good for your health? So there's a couple of things. First of all, in Tai Chi or in internal martial art in general, when you're breathing, you don't want to move your chest. Okay, so people tend to think that you expand you do inverse breathing, you breathe into your stomach. But obviously we all know, hopefully we all know that you can't actually breathe air into your stomach, right? Lungs is the organ that, that deal with breathing and air. The stomach does not have any capacity to deal with that. So while in some styles they believe that, you expand your stomach when you inhale, that inverse breathing, in my lineage we don't actually believe that, right? We believe that when you're inhaling, you're expanding your back. So basically, one of the qualities of hollowing your chest and bulging your back is so that when you're breathing, instead of doing this, you are doing that, right? I'm doing obviously, you're not supposed to breathe this hard, but it's just to make it more obvious. So you basically, without moving the chest, you expand the back. And in the manuscript of Tai Chi, they basically describe this as qi tie bei, right? The qi hugging the back. And why is this, healthier? Okay, first of all, we need to establish that the spine has a lot of neurons and nerves and other things connected to it. And in Chinese medical belief or practice, they put a lot of emphasis on the spine, whether it's acupuncture, whether it's massaging, and even in modern chiropractor. I know chiropractor isn't exactly a medical science, but they also believe in a similar thing, is to always check your spine to make sure that everything is aligned. So this just shows you that the spine is one of the very important part of our body. I mean, obviously, there's no part that isn't important on our body, but spine is particularly important in regarding to its connection to a lot of other parts of our body. However, spine is also the one part that doesn't really get exercised much, especially our back. Throughout everyday life, we do a lot of stuff with the front part of our body, but very seldom really in interaction with the back of our body, which is why usually the blood flow or circulation is better at the front than at the back. So when you actually inhale through the back and expand your back, when you inhale, you are actually forcing more blood to flow through your back, okay? And in doing so, increasing the blood circulation. And that goes hand in hand with pulling up your hip, because if your head is dangling down, even if you expand your back, it kind of gets, the circulation gets stuck. But if you hollow your chest, bulging your back, and pulling up your head, then as you expand your back, the circulation can easily go upward, right? We all know due to gravity, it's far easier for any circulation, including blood, to go downwards and come upwards. But, our brain is at the top, and the brain, coincidentally need a lot of blood, which is why people who are unhealthy, right, who have a weaker heart, the heart isn't pumping as much as they used to, and other circulation problem, they tend to feel lightheaded, right? The brain don't get enough oxygen, which is produced by, or which is delivered by blood. So in inhaling through the back, you're basically expanding the capacity on the back, which increases blood flow, which also kind of stimulates the nerves on the back a bit more than usual. And also, it could, I'm not saying it 100% does, it could improve your blood circulation going upwards, which then allows you to have sufficient amount of oxygen into your head, particularly if you hold up rather than dangling down. Now, another quality that is associated with expanding the back that people don't often talk about is that when we're talking about expanding of the back, we're not actually talking about the back. Okay, we actually are talking about the shoulders, which is, in another term, is called opening of shoulder, which is part of the 4 fundamental forces of internal martial arts. I already have videos talking about this, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But in a nutshell, as your chest goes in and your back expands, if you do correctly, you are basically expanding your shoulder blade, and in doing so, you are basically relieving stresses on the shoulder joint, right? I've shown this in other videos where in internal martial art, instead of doing something with your shoulder joint socket, and therefore any force that you receive is stressing up on your shoulder, which is a weak joint, you try to extend the shoulder and use the shoulder blade for any kind of rotation and interaction. And in doing so, any force that you receive get passed on directly to your back, and you bypass the shoulder joint completely. So this in itself already relieves the stress on your shoulder. So therefore your shoulder will less likely to get worn out. In case you don't know, in most of the sports that requires arms, like tennis or volleyball, shoulder is actually the most common part to get injury, precisely because shoulder is one of the weaker joints on our body, but it receives a lot of stress no matter what kind of hand movement you are doing, and therefore it's more prone to injuries. And internal martial art, you basically try to bypass this problem. Instead of trying to build muscles on the shoulder, we try to not use the shoulder joint to receive force and to stress against incoming force. And if you form a kind of habit like this, then eventually, even everyday life, you no longer stress up your shoulder. For example, if I were to pick up a cauldron while I'm cooking, I'm not gonna do this, respect the heavy, thick metal with food inside. I don't do this anymore. Instead, I fix the shoulder down. Just basically expanding on the back, go hand in hand with sinking of the shoulder, right? Those are all qualities of the 10 principles. So instead of picking it up like this and trying to cook, I will basically relax the shoulder and fix it onto my shoulder blade, and the whole back will be picking up the quadrant or whatever you call it while cooking. Or like if I were to open the door, instead of pushing the door like this, I'll be using my whole body weight. So kind of get into an everyday life habit. And even driving, instead of I see a lot of people who drives very intense, especially in traffic. But if you form the correct habits, then naturally your shoulder will always be down, and that not only relieves your shoulder, it also relieves your tendon here and part of the neck. And in those of you that don't know, I do design work from time to time, and I also do digital painting. And those work are quite stressful, especially when you have a deadline. The closer you are to a deadline, you get very stressed out and you start to rush and your body get tense. And back in the days, before I started doing internal martial art and opening of the shoulders, I just have very severe pains on my body here, neck and shoulder, this tendon here, like sprains, after a certain stressful job, because I have to sit there for 12 hours painting. And as the deadline draws closer, I start trying to move faster. And when I do that, everything just crumbles up. And after the deadline's over, so sometimes I can't really move my neck anymore. I have to go to massage or Chinese bone doctors to actually get it fixed. But now, ever since then, I have been doing shoulder extension and the opening of shoulder. I've realized that I actually just had a deadline last month. I'm still stressed. I'm still rushed for deadline. I still try to draw faster as the deadline approaches. But because of the training habit, I no longer stress here. I no longer do this. Instead, my arm is still stressed, which arguably isn't healthy. But no matter how I'm stressing here, it doesn't affect this part. So after the entire deadline, which was quite stressful, I might say, I don't actually have any problem on my necks and the part that I usually to give severe pain from. And that's also kind of a benefit of forming a habit of sinking the shoulder and extending the shoulder blade, which is what Tai Chi requires, as well as other internal martial arts. Now you might think, I've just said that your own personal experience, subjective experience, should not be taken as evidence. But okay, over here it is my personal experience, but it's based on a physical observation of how the body mechanic works. Right? It's not just that I feel better after doing something. It's actually that there is a physics reason behind why. It's because I'm no longer using the shoulder joints to draw. This part remains extended, the shoulder blade extended, and everything remains extended, and I'm only drawing with my arm. And that's why I don't feel any stress over here. So this is an example of how holding chest, bulging back, sinking shoulder can potentially be beneficial for your health. Right, so when it comes to opening of the shoulder, in the past I have had people who ask me, is it natural to be able to displace and move the shoulder blade, and will it potentially lead to injury in the long run? Now obviously if you don't know how it's done, you don't know how the proper training goes, and you just try to force it, then yes, there is a potential risk of injuries. The same goes for any other sport or exercise training that you do. If you do incorrectly, you are going to injure yourself. And furthermore, I know there are certain lineages of Tai Chi out there that misinterpret the term opening of shoulder, right? Kaijian. They don't understand that it's actually referring to the shoulder blade. They think Kaijian means to open the physical shoulder, and what they try to do is pull the shoulder socket open and have a space found here. And as a result, if you do that for a long period of time, your shoulders are going to be more likely to dislocate. right? Because you're constantly actually pulling your shoulder out of your socket, and through a long period of time, those joints get loose, and every time you try to use some strings or stress out your arm, the shoulder tends to pop out. So that is incorrect. If you do it like that, then yes, you are going to injure yourself. But if you do the correct method and understanding of, moving your shoulder blade, then I don't think there's actually any risk to long-term injury. And the reason why I can say that is because in my lineage, now whether it's Tai Chi or 五行通背, right? Both of the lineages emphasize a lot on opening of the shoulder. We can observe that none of my master or his Tai Chi brothers or my Tongbei master and his 五行通背brothers, none of them actually have any problem with the shoulder. And a lot of them, are as old as 78 or 80 years old. And none of them have this problem. So based on that, I can say that, if you do the method correctly, you shouldn't actually end up injuring your shoulder or your shoulder blade. Now, of course, some of you might think, how many people are in my lineage? Is there enough people to actually be a sufficient sample size to derive this conclusion? Now, here is the thing. So in my Tongbei lineage, I think we have about, I didn't count exactly, but around 8 Tongbei uncles that my master are familiar with. On my Tai Chi side, maybe there's 5 that my master associate with often, that we get to meet and see that they don't have shoulder problems. So that might not sound like it's a large enough sample size, but here's the thing. The sample size is important when you try to prove whether something is good for your health, for example, like is Tai Chi good for your health? Or does Tai Chi improve your longevity? That kind of statement, you need a large sample size because there's too many different elements that could contribute to a better health or to a longer lifespan. And therefore, it's very hard to pinpoint the contribution of exercise based on a very few sample size. Okay. However, when we are trying to determine whether something is harmful for you or your body, we don't actually need that large of a sample size. It's like, is this mushroom poisonous, right? If one person eats it and die, then most of the time that's enough evidence to say this mushroom is poisonous. And obviously, if you say, okay, maybe he died from something else, so let's say if there's 8 people who ate the mushroom and they all died, then we can say 100% certainty that this mushroom is poisonous. So on the same logic, if 8 of my 五行通背 uncles, including my master, there will be 9 of them, if they all do the exercises that make their shoulder blade more flexible and be able to extend forward and contract back, and none of them, right up into the 78 or 80s, are having injuries on the shoulder. I mean, my eldest 五行通背 uncle, who is in his, I think he's either 78 or 80 years old. I don't know exact number. Even at this age, he's still able to do these power generation moves. And if you hold out your arm, if he does the P on your arm, your whole arm gonna go all the way down to your neck. So at that age, he's able to demonstrate a very impressive amount of power, way more than I'm able to do at my age. And if he can do that, then obviously his shoulder is not injured. And based on that, we can basically know with reasonably good certainty is that if you do the exercise correctly, your shoulder blade will become more flexible, increasing range of motion, and will not get injured in the long run. Okay, next let's look at another big joint on our body, which is the hips. Right? In Tai Chi, we also talk about extension and opening of the hips. Now, I've said in my past videos, right, unlike the shoulder, which whether you extend it or not is quite visible, the hips is very hard to see. I mean, there is a physical change, but it's very hard to see unless you know exactly what you're looking for. It's far easier when you put your hand on someone and feel. So that's why it's very hard to explain what expanding of the hip actually entails. However, a good way of measuring is that your 2 hips are able to do separate motion, right? Unlike untrained person where the hip is fixed, you can rotate this way or that way. When hips are open, you can basically have one hip push forward and one hip pull back. They kind of can do 2 different things. Now again, this is for originally intended for combat purpose, because when your hips are open, then forces that come from the ground can much easier transfer to the upper body, and force that you receive can much easier transfer into the ground. Because if hips are closed, even if you connect your hand to your spine and everything, the force will act on your hip, and thus you will feel the stress here. But if you expand it, then the force then sinks further down into the ground. Again, I'm not going to go into detail here. I already have a video on the 4 fundamental forces. This is just to bring some background knowledge on the topic I'm talking about. So how is this good for your health, right? I've actually talked about this with my medical friends, and in short, any range of motion is always beneficial for your health, as long as you're not going into the danger zone, like trying to bend your elbow backwards or something. So the general idea in the medical field is that the more range of motion your body can do, the more healthier it potentially is, right? I mean, obviously there are different aspects of health, but in terms of the quality of health, having more range of motion is always better than having less. And for example, one of the signs of old age is that you can no longer do as much things with your body as you used to. And your body gets stiffer, the things that you used to be able to touch your toes, you no longer can. So those are all limitations on the range of motion that your body can do. And also, if you observe older people, you will see that hips are one of the places that get old really fast. And once they do, older people will have trouble walking. And often, the older people, they will have trouble walking and they will slip and fall and hurt their hips, or sometimes break their hips. And according to some research that Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson was mentioning the other day, that I was watching his video, I think about 72% or something of American elderly person who's above the age of 70, they die from falling and breaking a hip and never recover. So I'm not saying that if you do Tai Chi, you're never going to fall when you get older, right? That is not something I'm saying. But if you look at this from a physical, mechanical, and logical perspective, the more range of motion your hip has, then the more balance you will have, and the less likely you are going to fall. And now, of course, if your daily exercise routine including a wider range of hip motions, right, then that would mean regular walking will be a walk in the park for you, no pun intended. And obviously, wider range of hip motion is not exclusive to Tai Chi only. For example, I believe in Latin dancing, they also quite emphasize on the range of motion on the hips. So it's not only found in Tai Chi, but obviously if you add up all the special benefits that we're going to go through today, then you're more likely to find that one training that includes all these benefits are most likely internal style. And even then, I'm not saying that internal style is a better health exercise than other trainings out there, but it does kind of offer a more unique or uncommon array of benefits in one package compared to other type of exercises out there. Obviously, balance has various other aspects associated with it too, but having better hip motion do definitely contribute towards having a better balance. And furthermore, right, we understand that blood circulation brings oxygen and nutrient to every part of our body. For example, if you cut off your blood flow to certain part of your body, let's say you tie your arm off, and you leave your hand without proper blood flow for a sufficient amount of time, actually cells will start to die out, right? Which is why when you get an accident, sometimes due to a severe loss of blood, some unfortunate people's hand or leg or other part of the body had to be amputated because the cells are starting to die out. So on the opposite side, then, if you ensure more blood flowing to various parts of your body, then that will then ensure that these cells remain vitalized and active. And one of the issues with elder people is that they tend to sit more than they work because they get older, they want to sit and watch TV or whatever else they do. And in doing so, they're basically stopping the blood from circulating as well as they're supposed to. And I mean, given old age, if you're younger and you do that, it's okay because your heart is so strong, your circulation is so strong. But the older you get, the weaker your circulation already is. And if you sit around all day, then naturally certain part of the body will have less blood flow. And when you do get up and do something, then those parts of the body will not function as well as you remember them to be. So you might think, okay, but every day when I walk, I'm using my hip already. What's special about it? Well, when you're walking normally, your range of motion on your hips is not very much. So, that it can be sufficient, but I will argue that it's potentially better if you're able to have a bigger range of hip motion. Because when you want to move your hip bigger, right, like in chainsaw, right, you can see a good example with all the Chen Zhonghua's video, like when you have your hand here, you rotate your hips. So Yeah, I think it's hard to see here. Anyway, so when you're able to have a wider range of hip motion, you're basically also forcing more blood to flow into these joints, and in doing so increasing the blood circulation and possibly giving these joints more fuel or lubricant, so to speak, right? The oxygen and nutrients, so that these joints will remain functional for longer. Right, so that's basically how opening and closing of the major joints could potentially contribute to health. Next, let's look at compression and expansion.